Did he have any clue about child psychology? You might want to label that. Dude who has no clue about child psychology and also had, to that point, made a lot of immature decisions in his life, labeled me when I was 6. But basically, your reframe is your labeling. Dude who happened to be my dad, 24 years old, had already made immature decisions in his life and had absolutely no knowledge in child psychology, labeled me at an early, influential age, at the age of 6, as something negative with respect to the wall between you and a goal that you set out ahead of you. And it's like there's a clear path between you and that goal, but there is often an invisible wall. And I'm going to give you a doable one-day light path to break through invisible barriers between you and your big goals for change and transformation. I write on a blog called KindEdge.com, KINDEDGE, and that's where I'm publishing the tools that I built for myself that are small, bite-sized steps to achieve big transformational change and big goals. For a good 2 decades, I did every program, methodology, retreat, therapy, everything, every guru book, every self-help book. I got inspired for a good 20 years. And yet I never felt like any of those books or programs or leaders or gurus that inspired me understood the barriers in daily life, the barriers that hijack you, the emotional needs and responses that make it too difficult to kind of be 100% selfish to achieve these goals. And so I built KindEdge as a process and methodology using my corporate communications, consulting, and change management tools, because I realized I help large global organizations go through major mergers, major change management, major org changes. And I saw that the process was so big that you had to narrow down every little change step and diagnose the beginning and end and pull the client through that to get to the next step to affect those big changes that were needed. And so I built those kind of tools for myself and got kind of unemotional, crisp clarity on the change I needed to do, the action I needed to take today to keep the pegs moving forward so that over a week I would see physically visible change. And over a month, I would see obvious progress in a metrics-based, trackable, visible, observable way, which is very different from the general high-level intentions I got from most of the guru info that I consumed over the prior 20 years. When I got practical and bite-sized and very strict about this action must happen today or else it's fiction, every day in the future is always fiction. January 1st is fiction. Big change is never going to be easier January 1st just because the year changed. It is just as mucky and messy and hard to have those tough conversations, to push back on when people steal your time and so on and so forth. And so you can become a time tyrant, as I say. It's something else I read about on KindEdge. Time tyrant. You learn to fight. You learn you have to be a junkyard dog and fight for your time. You can't just be reasonable. You have to become as unreasonable as the rest of the world around you is going to be about wanting your time. So, as you go through, you have to build these core foundational skills and mindsets. And one of the ways that you're going to need, this is a hack that you're going to need to achieve big change, is to get through the invisible barriers. There are many invisible barriers, but one of them is secretly hidden, unbeknownst to you, in your brain. It is in your brain and your memories, and you're avoiding it like the plague, and you don't even know it's there. And so when you go forth, You'll say, oh no, I couldn't do that because it was raining, or no, I couldn't do that because I didn't want to interrupt this other person. When in fact, you're actually running away from a big brick wall in your mind. And I'll tell you where that comes from. And it's old stories that you have not retold. Now, I want to back up and say, I am not a therapist. I am not a doctor. I am not your therapist. I am not your doctor. You should seek any mental health, psychological, physical health support from a licensed professional. And I am sharing my experiences because these are tools that worked for me. So never pass up on the professionals that you need to move you forward helpfully. But this is a hack that I will offer to you that might give you a little movement and empowerment in a given day. So on KindEdge.com, we talk about the whole process for change, and it's about being kind and edge. So kind is, let's make this process enjoyable and sustainable for the long run, because big life change, whether you're trying to run a marathon or climb a mountain or start a charity or get a divorce or start a business or do some creative endeavor you've never done before or change your career, all of these are goals of big change. And it's easy to write down the steps. Oh, just go get a new career, go to this university, pick up the college application, etc. But there's many little bits in there that you're going to get held up on. And some of these can be assumptions in your mind, beliefs in your mind, fears of certain conflict, tough discussions, tough negotiations, giving up assumptions from the past, changing the assumptions. There's a lot in there that you need to get skills to champion, to clear the path towards that simple goal of let's just run this marathon or let's just change this career. So you want to make this doable. And so as you go forward, you will start to see these hidden barriers and you set out these goals for big change. We're doing the KindEdge thing, so you're trying to make this sustainable. And then the big part of KindEdge is you work past your edge. So there's something you have not, there is a barrier you've always backed off from, and that's your edge. And you have to find your edge. It might be physical. It might be that I've run 7 miles, but I've never run more than 20. But it also might be, I'm always afraid to be the one in the room that asks the difficult questions. I'm always afraid to ask for something for me, and I just defer to other people. There's all these little, I'm getting hit by rocks by a truck in front of me. If I didn't mention, I'm not sure, I'm driving home from Florida State. There was a shooting at my son's university, and so I went up to spend the weekend with them. And so I've been on the road quite a bit, 5 hours there, 5 hours back. But I wanted to see him, and I brought the dog, so I know my son's alive and well and knows that he's loved. So a big part of what holds you back, a big part of that hidden wall, as you set forth on a goal, but you don't realize why you suddenly, it just seems like your schedule, you can't handle your schedule. You can't wrangle this to achieve that goal. What is in the way? A lot of times there's a message in the back of your head that you've never unpacked. And it is from an old story that you just could sit down and retell. And now that you're an adult, or now that you're a few years older, if you retold that story to yourself, and I call it the Kind Refrain. So from KindEdge.com, we do the Kind Refrain. So we retell a story, and it's as simple as pie. This isn't like the 2-year appointment at the therapist. Go to your therapist and do the 2 years of appointments, have those discussions, talk about your family of origins, talk about your childhood programming, do all the work. But in my little tasks, what I learned that worked for me is in given days, in given moments where I was getting stuck, I needed to unlock movement. And the KindEdge.com process is about all those things. Unlock movement today, because that feels better than all sorts of other panaceas. Or also anything palliative may make you feel better, but the pain is still there under the kind of surface. And so if it's just palliative, you feel a little bit better, but you're just on hold. The pain is on hold. For me, when I find action and movement today, I see my goals moving forward. I feel empowered. I gain new skills. And when those skills for change and empowerment are used, when you start using that muscle for change, it is stronger tomorrow. It's not harder tomorrow, or it's not even as hard tomorrow. It is easier. It becomes more of your default mode. It becomes more of your knee-jerk reaction to say no to time wasters. And it just feels normal. It feels abnormal for me now. Things I used to feel guilted into doing, it now feels abnormal for me to go with that weird string pull. I can only act on my gut now that I've really worked in that muscle, which is great. I feel healthy, and I only continue to work with and invite in the people that meet me 50-50 on the 50-yard line, and it all works. I'm like, oh, now the math is working. Now I see how I played a part in other people not being good math for me. So this tool that you can use as a back pocket fix for when you feel stuck, when you feel your mind is holding you back from taking the next step, that scary next step. The Kind Refrain is the simplest action that you can take in 20 minutes. You can sit down with any notebook, and you just do this. You note, you label, and you retell. All of that without any shame, without any judgment. You note a memory, you label it, and then you retell it. And I'm going to give you an example, because the whole point is, until you unpack some of these stories, you will stay stuck, which is, I'm not good at sports. Because why am I not good at sports? Well, my dad always used to, and this is just I'm making up a fictional example. Oh, in the family, my sister had the long red legs and was the runner. And my dad always said, oh, so-and-so's the caboose. Look at our little caboose. And so I always felt like I needed to be last. And I guess I was slow, and then I didn't do track. And so I'm just not a good runner. And so every time this wonderful group of friends of yours go out running, you decline. And you just say, well, no, it's just because my legs aren't that strong. Well, your legs aren't going to be strong because you're not running. And it's no this, and you have all these reasons. But if you sit down and say, I do have this little faint memory of my dad and something he used to say and this funny family name about me being a caboose. And you sit down, you just rewrite it. And you rewrite the story as it is. You simply note it as it is. I would run with the family. I was 6. My dad said this. To this day, I believe that I am 6 and I'm the slowest person in any large group of runners, and that I can't keep up. I believe I'm a caboose. Take that, note it. Then let's put some labels. You just want to label it with your adult wise mind, with your grown-up wise mind. You just label it. Was my father all-knowing? No. How old was my father at that time? Oh, he was 24. That's interesting. Would I take life advice from a 24-year-old new dad? Ooh, surprise, surprise. The authority figure that I was seeing as my dad in this fictional story. Let's reframe that and say he was 24. Okay, and he was immature enough to maybe have 2 kids by the age of 24. Wow, that's really interesting. And he's calling of 2 sisters. He's creating sibling rivalry by calling one a caboose. That's interesting. Do I think he was the wisest person? Should I formulate my opinion of myself based on that person? Or should I start seeing this guy as a guy, and maybe not as my authority in life? He's my dad and I love him, but he's also just a guy. And probably barely remembers saying those things. Or he probably has a really screwed up sense of humor. Doesn't did he have any clue about child psychology? You might want to label that. Dude who has no clue about child psychology and also had to that point, made a lot of immature decisions in his life, labeled me when I was 6. But basically, your reframe is your labeling. Dude who happened to be my dad, 24 years old, had already made immature decisions in his life and had absolutely no knowledge in child psychology, labeled me at an early, influential age, at the age of 6, as something negative with respect to sports. That's an interesting reframe. And then you can work through that and you can reframe that and say, I had the potential to be just as good a runner as anybody else. And my sister's legs were long in the family, but my legs are pretty long in comparison to the average of the United States or the average of the world. I could still be a good runner, but I was labeling myself in this old story and I hadn't read it out. Note the events, label the players, label yourself, label the other person, imperfect, just a person, neither good nor bad. And then you can retell the story and say how amazing it was that even though this adult man, influential adult man in my life, said these things, I continued to run with the family, even though they called me the caboose. How amazing that I had the strength to do that without having, I wasn't being given the little participation award. I was actually being given a negative feedback. And I still did it. How strong was I physically and mentally? I was pretty damn strong there at 6 years old. And guess what? I'm even stronger now. And if I want to start running with a running group, I have the kahunas. I have the kahunas to maybe be the last runner, because look at me. If I'm starting as the last runner and I am the caboose, I can only get better. And if I'm starting with weak legs, I'll certainly get better. And so, yes, let's take on that new story. Awesome. That's a kind reframe. And you gain power in it and respect for yourself in how much more you took on than you. And I've done this in some really hard, deep, heavy things in my life. And again, rely on your therapist, your professionals for deep working throughs. But if you have a little thing in the back of your head, like, I don't want to sign up for this thing, because you have a message in the back of your head you haven't unpacked, you can get yourself in motion today by unpacking this in a little 20-minute exercise. You just note, label, and retell. I'll give you another one that's from my life. And this is still pretty benign. This isn't like a tragic story at all, but it's a true story. I've written this, I've summarized this on my website on KindEdge.com. There's a blog about the Kind Refrain. And so when I was a child, we had a group of several families that would go out and do camping together. We would go on various trips and so on. So in the Chicago suburbs on the Des Plaines River, the springtime on the Des Plaines River in Chicago, it is very cold. There's ice on the edges. It's a cold river. We went out as multiple families canoeing. And so I was small, and my dad was a very big man. And he's over 6 feet, but also very large. And so you can read the details on KindEdge.com in my Kind Refrain blog post. But we went out with all these families. It's a huge to-do. Everybody wakes up at 5 a.m. You get to the canoes. You get the van that takes you to the starting point. You get in the canoes. Everybody's packed lunches and food, and everybody's got gear on, and so on and so forth. And we were going down the river, I think, for a couple hours. And there was a point where, we got kind of pulled side by side by heavy, heavy waters. And we got, my father and I in the canoe got pulled to one side, and branches caught onto us, and we got kind of twisted around, and we did some things to try to get going and keep it going, but we couldn't, and we ended up capsizing, and the canoe fell over. Well, it was so cold that we had to cancel the whole canoeing trip. Every family had to pack up early, get pulled out, finish the trip. Like, it was just, the whole trip was canceled because it was like 32 degrees in that Des Plaines Water River. And my father and I had fallen in and so on and so forth. It was like, game's over. We're getting out. We're not going to recover from this cold situation. So um, back at one of the family's houses, we gathered together and all the parents were talking and the kids were just in the downstairs area. You remember those little split level houses? We were in the lower split level. Parents were in the upper kind of kitchen area. And people were just chit-chatting. And I felt like I heard my father say that, oh, it was really like, kind of like, well, Mary kind of did it. I'm Mary, so Mary kind of did it. Mary, it was really her fault that the canoe capsized. I believed that I heard some sort of like parental chit chat where it was a lower voice and you kind of go, oh, I understand. They're trying to keep me from hearing them say that. And my father, I loved my father. He sadly died when I was 21, but that was such an interesting thing for me to believe because he had never, ever said anything that wasn't just gloriously golden and wise and loving and caring. Like, his whole self, from the moment I was born to the day he died, was beautiful, loving, caring, supportive. One-on-one, he saw me. He was unique. He saw me uniquely from my siblings. He saw my siblings as their unique selves. Like, he was just the best. So for me to believe that is just my childish belief. And it just was not in alignment with anything he had ever done. But it was what I chose. I latched onto at that point. So I had this belief for years that I had caused this multifamily trip cancellation. I believed that was my fault, that I had done the bad, I had screwed up, that I had knocked over this canoe and caused the whole trip to be canceled. I put that on myself. And I don't know at what age, like 14, 15 years old, something like that. I finally felt like, I'm old enough now. I can get past this. I'm just going to tell my dad I know it was my fault, that he didn't want me to know it was my fault, but it was my fault. I caused that. I thought I was like owning my bad. And I said, Dad, I never told you this, but I heard you telling Mr. So-and-so. I'm not going to cry. I'm really not going to cry. I said, I heard you telling Mr. So-and-so that it was my fault. And I think you said it quietly because you didn't want me to know or whatever. You don't want me to feel bad, but it's okay. I'm old enough now to handle it. You can make me feel bad. I can handle it. I caused that whole problem, that whole cancellation of the canoe capsizing. That was my fault. I'm so sorry. And my dad looked at me and said, Mary Sue, do you really think that you, who at that age, I was about 38 pounds. I was the skinniest little pipsqueak. I was bright blonde on my head and shoulders, stick legs, and that was it. Shoulders aren't stick shoulders, stick legs. I was just a tiny little pipsqueak, just lines. You could draw me with just lines and a little blonde head. And I was in a canoe with a man who was about 300 pounds and heavy on the top. And he looked at me and he said, Mary Sue, do you think that your little pipsqueak body, even if you had taken all your weight and hung it out one side of that canoe or tried to rock it back and forth, do you think you could have ever done anything to knock over big, old, top-heavy me? And when he helped me do that kind reframe, I was like, oh yeah, physics doesn't work like that. Like, that would not happen. My little skinny air-based arms, even my head, if I hung my whole top of my body off the canoe, it would do nothing in comparison to his probably over 300 pounds at that point. And he said to me, he's like, of course, he's like, I don't want to blame you, but I wish you had at some point told me I never knew you heard me saying something, and whatever story I was telling quietly was certainly not about that. Like all the families knew. Like it's everybody knows. Like Larry was big. He was a big man. There's not one person that thought I could have done anything to not cover that canoe in comparison to his power to tilt it this much and knock the whole thing over. And again, it was more with respect to it was due to like pulling against the branch that had this tree branch that had gotten caught on the banks of the river, and it was just that awkwardness. But I had kind of owned that, and in the end, when he told me this reframe, I was like, oh my gosh, I did not think with my grown-up mind of the physical impossibility of me impacting the capsizing of that canoe. And so that's part of what I do in KindEdge.com. And I've done it in some really hard situations too. There's some that I'll do that really are therapist discussions. But like you can imagine me maybe feeling like hesitant to go on a canoeing trip and afraid because I think I'm the bad canoeer. I'm the one that creates problems in canoe trips. Well, isn't it nice to reframe the truth of a situation that there's probably equal probability of anyone tipping over a canoe, and that as an adult, I'm probably going to be okay. And, you know, whatever. And so there's that. And then these Kind Reframe tool process that I built for myself in KindEdge, a little bit more recently in life, in my adult life, I questioned. So I am not codependent. I've never been diagnosed as codependent, but I stayed in a relationship way longer than was healthy. I became what I call a human wheelchair to disorder. I was an absolute human wheelchair to extreme disorder that many therapists, many programs, many 12-step programs, all were like, that is a problem that is continuing to occur no matter how much you try, no matter how much you read, no matter how many of the programs you participate in and do and follow with your little good girl to-do list. It was way too long. And I had a little bit of shame over not being the powerhouse, bold, own this situation person. I kept finding new solutions to the same problem. And I had a little like, wow, when I look at time, that's why I value, one of the reasons I value time so much is if it's not the pandemic, if it's not the flood that hit my house, if it's not that the other things that happened, then is it me wasting another decade in a toxic situation? Why would I do that? Well, I sat down and did a kind reframe. And here is what I care about more than any of the things I may have lost in those decades. I've had multiple conversations with people who have regrets. And I don't have regrets right now, but multiple people who have deep regrets. And I realized that's exactly the type of regret I was avoiding, and I refuse to have regrets about hurting my children or taking things away from my children. That's what I care about. Legacy is what I care about. And when I really sat and decoded my own story, I didn't stick around too long. You know what I stuck around for? I waited to pull the lever until I saw that my children were fully baked, independent, and self-differentiated, so that when I did have us in two separate houses, I would not end up with regrets that I very sadly have seen and experienced other people have, which is sometimes when the children are young, and this is hard, this is not something that not everybody can control this, and not everybody can wait around on divorce. But for me, since I was able to extend the time and push the ball down the field, I was able to go long enough to where when kids were living separately in separate houses, I knew that they were self-differentiated enough to not be controlled by disorder and not be accepting of disorder. They were self-differentiated. They had many sources of references, mentors, supporters, not just me. And that was important to me. It couldn't just be parent A or parent B, winner, loser, choose my way, choose my, I've heard of the parents that are like, you have to be vegan at my house, and you have to be carnivore at my house. I didn't want that kind of splitting happening with them. But they had enough resources and enough references to their own choice, their own self-agency, that I knew that even if they experienced disorder, they would be able to get resources, see it as disorder, and not feel like they had to be a people pleaser and so on, and give themselves up and do that self-harming kind of aligning with a disordered person. Other people I've heard stories from, and sadly, when they have to divorce when the kids are young, sometimes the kids are put in danger, physical danger, neglect, drunk driving danger, just verbal disorder, or being led down a path that isn't healthy. Some kids, one parent will tell them lies. And when they're that young, there's nobody there to offer them another model of normalcy, another example of normalcy. So then they go back and forth between two houses, and they lose track of which one is normal and which one is toxic or disordered. And they can lose themselves, and they can take many decades to truly find themselves again. And I knew when I've heard this from other parents, and it just came up again last weekend in a discussion of how hard that is. I knew that I could hold out another decade. I knew that when I really sat down and said, oh, that was my wise mind. That was my wise woman leading. That was my gut. That wasn't me blindly dragging something out. That was my gut. That was my superpower saying, you know what? I can take care of myself and drag this out a little bit until I see my kids have their wings to fly. And then we can do us. We can do that difficult separation. Because I know it's going to be a ruthless game when it happens, and it was. But guess what? I will not have taken from me the most important thing, which is my legacy, what I give to my kids and the path that they set forward. So as I reframed that, if you just label it, when people say, how long were you in that marriage? 24 years. Ugh. Why'd you stay so long when it was clearly so toxic? So many, I did the 12 steps, spouse 12 steps. I did that, all the things, every program, every retreat, the Godspeed method, that I actually called it. I did it all for 24 years. I wasn't ever not doing somebody else's problems. That was my full-time job, in addition to my full-time job. And parenting as a kind of, all that. That could sound tragic. That could sound pathetic. But I was working the whole time. I was building. I built so many superpowers during that time that I kind of did it behind the scenes. So when I was on my own, boom, I was happy as a clam at high tide. Literally, I had done so much work that being alone was 20 times better and easier than being alone while being a human wheelchair to somebody else's disorder. So I look at that, I'm like, damn, you are powerful, growth-minded. You've got your legacy. You figured out a strategy for not having regrets with what you most cherish. I will die happy tomorrow if I do. And that is my kind reframe for myself. I ask you, if you've done a kind reframe, or if you're about to do a kind reframe, what is your kind reframe? And how does it help you get movement when you say, I actually did champion that thing. I wasn't the loser. I was the champion. I climbed and I got there. So leave me a note and feel free to subscribe if you would like to. You can follow my website at kindedge.com/subscribe. And on YouTube, it's just KindEdge, KINDEDGE, KindEdge. And if you can subscribe, that would be great, because I would like to continue to connect with a community of people interested in unlocking the alternate ending to your life. And it's a journey that's not going to be easy, but it's going to be fun. I wish you peace.